This is the Ecwid e-commerce show with your host, Jesse Ness, along with Richard Otey.
All right, RichE, happy Friday. We're back again.
It is that time. It comes so quick.
Right.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited, but I wanted to put in a statement before this. Like, I have an addiction of buying URLs, buying websites, things like that. So promise me that you will stop me from making a purchase by the end of the pod.
If we were still in the studio, the pre-COVID, if we were still in the studio, I might have been able to promise you that. I can send you mental vibrations to try not to, but I mean, you're sitting in front of a computer screen. I can't. Yeah. I can just try to help, but
the bank account is a couple keystrokes away. So, all right, I'm going to try to control myself here.
Well, with today's guest, you're probably going to end up buying one, but I think you're going to be so fired up, you'll probably think it out a little more and then buy one later tonight. So, right. Why don't we bring on our guest and see what people are, what are they talking about? Why are they saying this?
All right. Well, let's bring on our guest, Mark Doust. Mark, how are you?
I'm doing great. I collect bad domain names as well, by the way.
Yes. Yeah. Sometimes I look back at the list. I'm like, oh, what was I thinking when I bought that one? Hey, you got to start somewhere. Sometimes buying the domain is the right place to start.
Yeah. My worst is cat versus cat. I mean, the possibilities are endless. catversuscat.com. I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, that was a bad time of my life. Why did I do that?
Tell me for real, were you genius enough to get that pre-YouTube?
Yeah. You know what? When did I buy that? No, YouTube was out at that point. So there's still possibilities. If somebody wants to buy cat versus cat, it's yours.
You still own it. That's the question.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Why would anyone ever let a domain name expire, right?
I like it. Yeah, I tend to, I have to cull my list every now and then. I have to say like, okay, no, you're not going to do anything with that. Just let it go.
A domain name account is a graveyard of past ideas, right?
Yes, for sure. Yeah. Unfortunately, they're $15 a year. That's the problem. So,
exactly.
Yeah. We've stacked them up too. That's not even counting the whiskey and the into night, late night ones. Those don't count. So we were so excited. We didn't really do you the service that we probably should have done for you. Why don't you give us a little bit of backstory? We introduced you by name, but why don't introduce your company and a little bit about what you guys do, and then we'll kind of get into why we brought you on and how your knowledge is going to be able to benefit Ecwid users.
Yeah, sure. Happy to provide a little background. So Mark Doust, as you did introduce, and beyond being the proud owner of catversuscat.com, I'm also the founder of Quiet Light Brokerage. And Quiet Light, we started late in 2006. And what I had done at that point was trying to help e-commerce business owners, website owners, people who owned profitable online assets who wanted to sell those assets. Right. And at the time we were working with very small side projects, anywhere from selling from $10,000 up to maybe $400,000. So we're a little bit different now today, but that's still our core focus, helping people sell their online businesses, not just domain names. So I wouldn't actually do just domain names, but usually something that's somewhat established. So hoping that we can just talk today about exits. What does it mean to exit, and having the mindset, even in the startup phase, what does it mean to have that exit, and is that possible? And what decisions do people make today that eventually impact their overall value? So, yeah,
definitely like to talk about that. I think we do this pod usually trying to help people start a business, build a business, market, and everything like that. But if we can start to, at some point, people are going to want to sell the business, right? So what are steps they could take from day one to be ready for an exit, even if they're not going to exit in the next year or two? Like starting from the beginning, what sort of mindset should they have to start being in the idea of an exit?
Well, I think one of the things just to have is the mindset that you can sell a business, right? And this is something that even for people that have owned businesses for a long time, and have grown them past that startup seed sort of stage, right? They've had 2, 3, even 7, 8, 9 years in business. Is we often think about businesses as ways to make money, and that is what they're about, right? They're also ways to create things and maybe to exercise that creative muscle. But we don't think about the business as something having value in and of itself, the asset value of the business. And so I would just start with that. Understand that if you're getting started in the world of business, online business, if you're starting something out, you're building something that will hopefully make you some money, but think about it in a different way as well. You're also building something which is valuable in and of itself. And when you start to have that mindset, then I would argue, if you start to think about this a little bit more, a lot of the principles that go into building a business that you can sell eventually for 6, 7, and even 8 figures. And I know that sounds like, wow, how could I ever get to that point? The answer is yes, you can get to that point if you follow some basic principles. You have to have success in business as well, of course. But if you follow the right principles and understand why do people buy businesses, online businesses in the first place, the decisions you make today will impact that down the road in the future. So yeah, mindset. I love talking mindsets.
It's interesting you bring that up and specifically mention Beyond 8 Figures. I used to do another podcast, Beyond 8 Figures, and it was specifically about starting, scaling, and exiting a business. And we've never really covered that on this one. And it was interesting on that show how some people began with the exit in mind and they kind of built it and structured it along that. And others, we kind of described it as, built the plane while they were flying it, I guess you would say, and they adjusted accordingly as they saw. But, there were very similar things on both sides. But something you brought up there, even though we were joking about domains, in some way that is a form of this big collective, because even if the business failed, that domain still could have value if you pick the right one, you drove enough traffic. So I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but that it still does mean something. What I did want to ask you though is, when it comes to that beginner, and if they're not sure if they're going to exit, are there things that they could do that still prepare them well for exit or holding on to the business?
Yeah. So yes, is the short answer, but obviously you didn't bring me on to say yes or no. So let's dig into that a little bit more. There's the exciting stuff in my world, then there's kind of the rote, a little bit less exciting elements. And I'm going to talk about the less exciting elements first, because these are things that are 100% in your under your control. And frankly, you should be doing from the startup stage and the growth phase and the maturity phase of any business. And it starts with documentation of your business and keeping things organized and separate from your personal life. I think when we're starting a business, we often give sort of a acknowledgement to the idea that we should have a sense for how much money we're spending and how much money we're bringing in that first year. But we, might just scratch it down on a piece of paper, or we just wait for those bank statements to come in the door. And then we take a look at that and figure out how much money we made or lost. I would argue, don't do that. Take the time from day one to install QuickBooks or get an account with QuickBooks, professional accounting software. And there's going to be a learning curve, but learn how to use it. And I say this, and I know it's a burden for a lot of people. And I say this with a lot of personal experience. My sister owns a dog training business. My brother started a micro publishing company. My other sister owns a custom candle making business. And I give them all the same advice. And they're always like, it's just so much work to do this. And I'm like, you think it's work now, just wait until next year when you try to file your taxes and you need to figure this stuff out then. And you spend an entire day doing this, then you're going to realize that it's a lot of work to do it on that day as well. And you still need to get these numbers. You talked about building the plane as you're flying it. Well, this happens all the time for clients of ours, right? People who have grown their businesses to a point where they could have a 6-figure exit. And they come to us saying, I am running ragged. I want to sell this because I want to do something else. It's a lot of fun. but I'm at the point where I want to sell this. I'm making $100,000 a year right now. What could I sell it for? And we take a look at the business and we say, look, you know, the business itself looks fantastic. We could definitely sell this. We could probably sell for 250, 300, $350,000 if we can show this in a documentation, but your books are a mess. And then they're like, okay, well, I'll go get my books cleaned up. I've been working with a guy since last July who falls right in this category, and his books have not been kept properly. So he's been interviewing and hiring bookkeepers to go back and clean it up. And that's expensive. It's time consuming. There's no guarantee that you get it right. And the more history that you get, the harder it is to do. So, keeping things organized and having your boring data and books done from day one is something that I would absolutely do. And you know what, people that build to sell, they get that stuff right from day one. Absolutely. So that would be sort of the boring aspects of it. Do you want me to get to the stuff that I find a little bit more attractive and fun, and I think scratches that entrepreneurial itch a little bit better?
Oh, no doubt. Would love to get you there, but thank you for starting with just the basics. I mean, it's always important, and every sport tells us that over and over again. Anything we've ever done well, we know it's getting good at those fundamentals. But yeah, let's get to the sexy stuff too.
I would even I'll add one more on the boring comment. Like, it's pretty easy to have a separate checking account, or even at least just a separate credit card. If you can buy some time, and you can do that for like a year and still catch up. Just don't do that for like multiple years and then try to catch up, because it will be a huge pain. But one credit card, one checking account at least is like head and shoulders above the mess you're going to be finding yourself in. So, all right. Anyway, let's get to the more important, more fun stuff.
And we are not legal advisors and all
Not an attorney
of whatever kind of thing. And I'm so bad at it, I don't even know how to say the disclaimer. So don't take advice from me. This is pure entertainment.
I'm just going to, I'll close this out by saying I am the world's biggest hypocrite of this, right? Because I have not done this all the time in my business career. Now Quiet Light, we have CFOs that are working with us to help keep that stuff organized, because we have to. But the first few years, I give this advice because I've scrambled at tax time multiple years in a row to think, what was that charge back last June? Oh, I don't really remember what that was for, right? Or where did this money come from? I don't really know. It seems so silly that you can't remember. All right, let's talk about the more fun stuff, and the stuff that I think gets us excited as entrepreneurs, and that is, what are you actually creating? And I want to, again, talk about this kind of at a really high level here. What becomes sellable at the end of the day? And what becomes sellable are brands, are businesses that have developed some reputation, some level of brandness to them. When we actually close a deal, there's a document in this closing process that we call the allocation of purchase price. And all it says is it's a document that we put together that the IRS can reference later on, that basically says, hey, you received a lot of money for this business. We need to know how to tax you for it. And when we do this allocation of purchase price, there's a line in there where most of the purchase price usually goes towards goodwill, this kind of generic concept, this blue sky sort of concept of goodwill. You've built something that is a little intangible, but has value in and of itself. People recognize you. They know who you are. You've built goodwill with people out there. This is what people buy. This is what people pay for. This is what people want to acquire. Now, I bring this up because some business owners are in the startup phase, look to see, how can I churn a quick buck? How can I do something very quickly with this business? And so they look at the lowest possible bar to be able to get a product to market. And that's totally fine initially, but don't settle at that level, right? Where you want to be, where you want to get to as you're growing your business, is a brand that is unique, a brand that offers something that your users look for and come back for. Those are the most desirable businesses out there to build. Now, we can break this apart. I have a whole framework that I love to tell people, and we can dig into this of, what we call the 4 pillars of value that make a valuable business. Happy to jump in that. But I think from, what is the 10,000 foot view? What is a 50,000 foot view? Let's even get higher than that. it's just that buyers want to buy, well, first, a profitable company, because no one wants to buy a company that they're going to lose money on, right? That's kind of self-evident. But second of all, people want to buy a brand. They want to buy something that they can grow beyond just its core. So what can they build on, and what can they do more with?
Yeah, it's a great point. There's another word for brand. It's not as sexy in one way, and it's way sexier in another way. You want to know what I call it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Margin.
Margin.
Yep. When you got a big, good brand, you got a big margin in there. Like a Louis Vuitton bag, not that much different than some of those other bags, truly, but that brand made that margin grow huge, right? Like, I know it's a strange way of looking at it, but this, the way you presented it right there made me think of it in a slightly different way. Unlike, say, real estate, where you're relying on the comps of the three bedroom, two bath next door, and you're a 3 bedroom, two bath, you're going to get about the same money next door. But in the world of businesses, this brand, this thing that can go into this entity of goodwill that you refer to, is this big, like, wow, like, for whatever reason, they've mesmerized their clients enough. And I don't even mean that in a bad way, to think it's worth, $500 for what everyone else is paying $50 for in this other bag over here, just because it's got that logo on it or something. So
yeah, and we can expand this concept a little bit too, right? To say maybe, and I like to talk about brands because I want to get people away from just the reselling mindset. However, I've seen resellers do what they do well, but you know where their value is? It's in the systems in the back end, and it's in all the proprietary technology that they've built in the back end to do it at scale, right? Nobody wants to buy somebody who's just flipping products from Alibaba, right? I mean, that can be interesting to see where a market is and to discover products, but that's not highly sellable because there's really no barriers to entry there for somebody else to do it. Brands are powerful. Louis Vuitton is powerful because there's only one Louis Vuitton. You're buying that name, right? Anybody can create a handbag, but only one company gets to slap that label on it, which has that brand recognition. So what is that defensible element? What makes this business unique? What makes this business worth acquiring that somebody can build upon? That's what we want to get after. That's what we want to buy. It's the difference between creating a job where you're your own boss and creating something that starts to have its own legs and can stand on its own. That's the difference that we want to get to.
Yeah, unless you want to go somewhere else, Jess, I'm interested in these 4 pillars and heading that direction. So, like,
yeah, I mean, I think a brand, you can obviously, a buyer's going to be able to figure it out, like, and you're going to pay a premium for that, right? If you have it's not just a website. Like, is there like a Facebook and Instagram presence? Is there an email list? Are there reviews that customers love you? Are there, is there search traffic that they search for the domain name, right? Or is it, if there's not, then there's probably not a brand. So it's something that could be, you can prove a brand and you can sell it for a higher valuation.
Right. And when you're selling other people's products, oftentimes the competition at that point becomes a race to the bottom, right? A race to what do you compete on at that point? It's oftentimes your ability to market and price. And that's a tough game to play in the long term. It's not sustainable, right? Yeah. That's why brands have nice protection, because you're no longer necessarily competing as much against somebody who's selling the exact same product. That's why these companies that are doing reselling at scale, they have something that is different and unique that allows them to do it at scale. So again, thinking a little bit beyond just simply price and maybe a little bit of design, getting something that's going to be sustainable and built in the long term, built for the long term. Pillars. You guys want to talk pillars of value?
Yeah, I mean, I love that. Just to close the loop on what you just said, though, step 1, no matter what, whether you plan on exiting or whether you plan on keeping your company, you should be thinking about your brand. You should be thinking about, how do you stand out? Excuse me, what makes you unique in a way that nobody else has that product, whatever that product may be. If it's just the fastest and the cheapest, watch out. Did I hear you correctly? And if so, just let's move into those 4 pillars.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great summation. Great summation. All right, 4 pillars of value. I'm going to say them real quickly, and then we can just talk about them a little bit. And what are we talking about here with 4 pillars of value? Normally, I would give this talk to somebody who has a business that's a couple years old, and I want to really teach them, what is going to drive the value of your business, and what might actually hold that value back from being what it could be. And this is really good to know when you start a company as well, or you're in the process of starting a company, because you can start to build your business around these principles. And the beautiful thing about these principles as well is if you get these right, you've got a great business to own. At the end of the day, a great business to sell is a great business to own. There's a reason somebody's willing to offer you a lot of money for it, because they want to own it. All right, so the 4 pillars, since I've teased it out enough, are risk, growth, transferability, and the documentation. I started with documentation, and it's that big of a point that I want to make it into a pillar all of its own. Documentation is that 4th pillar. Let's go through these. Risk. From a buying standpoint, from an acquisition standpoint, we obviously are buying a business because we want to make more money. If a buyer is going to buy a business, they want to make more money than they're spending on it. That's self-evident. Nobody buys a business to lose money. Risk stands out as something that is going to destroy the value of business, of that investment, before you can get a good ROI, right? So what are areas of risk? What makes buyers recoil or say, I don't want anything to do with that, right? Concentration. Concentration is a huge issue in these businesses. So what is concentration? Concentration is when one person knows everything, does everything, and is the key person to the business, and maybe they have their name all over it. We see this a lot with product-based businesses put out by doctors, right? Because they got those initials before their name, and they're like, I am going to use my status as a doctor, as they should, to give authority to this product. It's a great way to launch a product. It's a bad way to sell a business down the road. The famous marketer, Neil Patel, has an SEO agency called the Neil Patel Agency. And he has publicly said, he's like, I wish I never named this Neil Patel Agency, because I can't sell myself. I'd like to sell my business someday. I can't, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's impossible for him to do so. That's a concentration and a
He
dependency.
could change
issue.
his name. I know what you're saying, and I know the story, but he could still change it. Tony Robbins, same thing, right? That's why he takes his wealth and puts it in other businesses. But I don't want to lose the point. It's actually well taken. You got to be the dancing bear if it's about you and it's your name, and you got to keep going. You can't sell that, because either someone else has to become the dancing bear. There's not systems and processes in place that someone can take over without you and your knowledge.
Yeah, when I give presentations on this topic, I've had to stop using this example, but I love using The Princess Bride, the movie The Princess Bride, as an example, and the Dread Pirate Roberts, because there's a line in there where, he explains that he's not the real Dread Pirate Roberts. If you haven't watched the movie, go watch it. Just watch that scene, and I'm going to say you want your business to be like the Dread Pirate Roberts, right? The real Dread Pirate Roberts, I'll spoil the end, is retired and living like a king in Patagonia. All right. So risk. The other areas of risk would be vendors. If you're ordering all of your product from one vendor, that can be a problem. If you have one customer that makes up a bunch of your revenue, that's a problem. If you have one hero SKU, so one product that everybody loves and everything else everyone's kind of cold on, it's a little problem. It's not a huge problem. It's a little problem. We also look at concentration from a customer acquisition standpoint. So are you getting all of your customers from Facebook and you've never bothered to build an email list, right? We want to broaden that out. And these are things, again, you do this over time, broaden that out. If you might launch a business purely with Facebook ads, broaden it out to have email in there as well and get that repeat coming there. Other areas of risk that we look at would be an issue of obsolescence, right? The buggy whip industry used to be huge until that darned automobile came along, and now it's, kind of a novelty industry. Are you in an obsolescence industry? We see this with electronics. Electronics are squarely in line with potential obsolescence. Toy verticals can be kind of dicey when it comes to obsolescence or fad based cycles. And so you have to have good plans to protect against that. So risk, this first pillar is all about looking at your business and saying, where are the real risk factors for my business? And how can I shore those up, right? If you're using one vendor, just establish relationships with another vendor. You don't actually have to order products. Just know that you can go to them. If you're the key person, make sure that you start documenting your procedures so that somebody else will eventually be able to take over those roles. And eventually, once you're able to, bring somebody else in so that you can start to spread this out. If you have a hero SKU, that's great. Figure out what made that so good, and let's start working on the product development to see what we can do to broaden that out. If everything's coming through Facebook, develop that email channel or other channels, right? Risk, mitigate it. That's what we want to do. And if you're in a buggy whip industry, make sure that you have a great product development cycle so that you can start selling driving gloves and driving goggles for those first convertible cars that they had, and continue to iterate that way. All right, that's risk. Growth. Growth is huge, right? Buyers buy for a return on investment. Nobody buys a business to lose money. Growth means you get your return on investment faster. It accelerates ROI. Now, everybody wants to growth. I love the chair I sit in because I get to tell people, hey, you want to be more valuable? You should grow your business, right? It sounds so easy. But the fact is, it's hard to do. I get it. So what do we want to show here? What we want to show is that you haven't tapped out your marketplace completely. That's really what we're looking for. We want to be able to show potential buyers in this scenario. We want to show them that we have products that we can launch. There's a very healthy launch cycle out there if we're a product-based business, or we just want to show historically our industry is growing. From just a business startup standpoint, this is also really important. You want to make sure that you have constant runways that you can follow in the future to continue to expand your business. You don't necessarily need to pursue them. I worked with a seller years ago who was doing all of his product fulfillment with his son on Tuesdays and Thursdays out of his garage. He came to me to sell, and I asked him why. I'm like, you have a great business. It's like netting you $400,000 per year. Why do you want to sell? And he said, because I don't want to take the next step. Oh, okay, fair enough, right? He didn't want to hire people. Somebody might sit on a business that's throwing off some good cash and just decide that's good enough for me. But have those growth plans there in the event that you do want to grow, need to grow, or in the event of a sale, you want to be able to show that growth. Just a quick point on this. Entrepreneurs, we are a horribly optimistic bunch, right? And we love what we are doing, and we always think that we're going to turn it around. I bought a business 4 years ago that's lost money 4 years straight, and I keep saying that the turnaround is right around the corner because I am horribly optimistic about it, right? With that in mind, for growth, we want to talk and speak to very realistic avenues of growth, right? The more realistic we can make it, the better. If your growth plan is, well, if somebody just had more ad money, they could do really well. That's not a very realistic avenue towards growth, right? Saying, hey, I've launched 4 new products this past year. Business grew by 25%. I've got 10 other products in the launch queue. I feel really good about them. That's an avenue towards growth, right? That I can look at and say, there's something really good there. So that's risk and growth. I'm going to pause there because, guys, I could talk and you could just take the headphones off and walk away for a little bit on this. I'm going to pause there to take a drink of water and let you interject.
Yeah, I had a question on the growth because you talked more about having plans for growth, but obviously, when you're looking to sell, people are looking at a bunch of different sites. Like yours is not the only site they're looking at. There's also the having proven growth, right? Like there's like the guy that had the $400,000 business. Okay, that's several years in a row, but obviously it's better to have, if it was 300 the year before, 200 the year before, like that's proven growth. Like what's going to sell for a higher valuation? Proven growth with no extra plans, or relatively flat with a bunch of plans for the future, right?
Yeah, no, that's a really good distinction. And I guess I focus a little bit more on the avenue towards growth because it's easy for me to say you should be growing. It's a lot harder for somebody to do it, but there might be no single more important influence on the value of a business than its recent growth history,
Yep.
right? So if a business is growing 20% year over year for 5 years straight, I mean, that business is going to get a very rich multiple. If you have a business that's growing currently at 200% year over year, yeah, you're going to get a very rich multiple on that. It's going to do very, very well. So absolutely. This comes to timing. Your question also kind of comes to timing. If we're thinking about an exit, and when you're in the process of owning your business for a while, right? and looking at that potential exit. Getting the timing right is important. Sometimes people wait, too long until that business is in decline, and now all of a sudden they've lost a lot of potential value on the business. So yeah, out of the two, what's more important, having avenue source growth or actual growth? Actual growth.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. You can't fake, you're not going to fake your taxes and pay more to the IRS. Like that's real growth that actually happened. Right. So.
Right. Exactly. You got to be able to demonstrate it and show that it's real. And, the one thing that we see sometimes from people, and it's a bad thing, people look at it and they say, well, I want to grow my earnings, right? Because the way these companies are valued is a multiple of their earnings. So what they do is they're like, hey, I'm going to cut my ad spend. And so they cut their ad spend and their earnings go up, but then their revenue starts to go down. And it looks like you look at a graph and it's like this alligator, right? The lines are converging. And I was like, don't do that, right? Because we know what's going to happen next. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that if your revenue is going down, your earnings are going to go down eventually, even if the short-term effect is there. So just growth in general is something we want to see, both top line and bottom line growth.
Okay. So you can't trick people. You can't just say like, all right, yeah, we're just going to stop. Yeah, we're going to stop this expense, get our EBITDA up, and think that's going to magically go into the valuation.
Yeah, it's amazing how smart people can be when they're spending 6 or 7 figures. They'll figure that out. And they look for that risk, right? So no, you're not going to trick somebody through that short term.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Cool. Transferability, ready for it?
Yeah.
All right, transferability. It's super easy. How easy is it for somebody else to run your business? That's really what transferability is. It's I want to sell. Are you going to be able to come in and run this business effectively from day 1 or day 30 or day 60? And what's it going to take to get you there? What we're looking for there, we're looking for, have you documented your procedures? Do you have good documentation of how you handle things like returns, how you order inventory? We're speaking a little bit about the fourth pillar here, but do you have good documentation on your business in general so that somebody else can start to run it? The other elements that we would look for, especially in more technical niches, would be, is somebody else able to do what you're doing? I'll give you an example. I talked to a woman just the other day who has a unique line of makeup where she was very instrumental in coming up with the formulation for the makeup. And, the flag that goes off in my head immediately when I'm hearing this is, will a buyer be able to make this like you did? Right? Are they going to be able to, because they can't just sit on the products that she has. They're going to want to build more products. Are they going to be able to figure out that formulation? Because I know for myself, I'm not going to be sitting in my bathroom putting foundation on, seeing if it did a good job with my skin, right? She knew what she was doing here. And so we had a long conversation about that. What is your process? You don't need to tell me, but what is your process? And can that be trained? Can that be transferred? Or are you going to have to consult with them? So highly technical fields, we're looking at something like that. Like, can that transfer over? And then finally, restrictions, like legal restrictions. Sometimes vendors have restrictions. Will those contracts transfer over? Or once you build a team, will your team transfer over? I'm talking to that business owner here who might be listening, whose uncle does his books, whose sister does a product design, whose dad is a part of the customer service team. You can't sell your family out like that, right? And it might be fun for running a business. I tease my business partner all the time about this because a few Christmases ago, he was evaluating a business, and the brother was earning $2,000 a month for doing the books, right? And my business partner, right before Christmas, told this guy, he's like, "You need to fire your brother." And he's like, "You want me to fire my brother right before Christmas?" He's like, "Absolutely. You need to fire your brother, and we need to get someone else in here doing your books because no one can buy your brother, right? And we need to demonstrate this for potential buyers." So transferability, what's going to make it difficult? I've dealt with retail stores that sell online and in a store, and sometimes those companies have vendors that require a storefront presence, right? They won't sell to just the online stores. Now that's increasingly rare to see. It used to be very common about 10 years ago to see that. But those would be the types of restrictions to transferring a business that we want to watch out for. Etsy, you can't transfer, right? So I tell people all the time, Etsy's a great marketplace to discover products and niches. It's a horrible, horrible marketplace to build a business on because you'll never be able to sell it. No one can take that over. We've tried, doesn't work. They're the hardest of the bunch. So we won't even touch them. But good for product discovery.
Yeah.
Yeah. Last, documentation. We touched on it. So we can spend a little less time than I normally would. And I normally hammer people over the head with this one. It was like, get your documentation in order, but let's go back to it. Keep clean books, right? Keep clean books, hire a bookkeeper once you're able to afford a bookkeeper, have it in QuickBooks or Xero. Don't do it in Excel. Have your tax returns tie at least to what you are making, right? You might want to reduce that income tax liability. That's fine, but make sure that you can tie things together. Keep copies of contracts, do the SOPs, really basic, real business stuff, right? That we should all be doing, but take the time to actually organize it, throw it up in a virtual drive. One suggestion I love to give here is for your business, start up a LastPass account or a OnePass account and put all of your business passwords in that one account, right? Make it separate from all of your other personal stuff. It's just a good habit to get in. If you use something like a MacBook, set up a different profile just for your business so that it's all in one place. Keeping things separate visually, mentally, all of this, it'll help you from a business standpoint because it'll help you from a productivity standpoint. When it comes time to sell, everything will be in one place and it'll be much easier to transfer. So there we go. There's the 4 pillars. Really run through pretty quickly. Risk, growth, transferability, documentation. If you do well on all 4 of those pillars, your business is going to be very, very valuable. It needs the other element there, of course, of profitability and some history and some revenue coming in. But if you want to maximize what you have, that's where you need to really focus.
Okay. No, that's good. I know you ran through it faster than you would in other scenarios here, but like, all right, let's talk dollars and cents, right? Like you're a brokerage. So for people listening, I kind of have an idea of a valuation, but assuming, you meet all of the pillars or some of the pillars, like what's the kind of the variation in values that people could look at? And I know it depends on every single thing we just mentioned, but like what's the range?
Yeah, I wrote a guide a while ago on this, and I came up with something like 100 plus variables that come into changing that. But let's throw numbers out here. Let's say that you have a business that's doing $200,000 a year in revenue and $40,000 a year in earnings, right? So after all of your expenses, you got $40,000 that you're taking home.
Yeah.
A business like that could be valued anywhere from 2 times the earnings on the very low end, so $80,000, not including any inventory, all the way up to maybe 3.25 times those earnings, right? Now, I'll say this, as you grow in size, those multiples get richer, right? So we closed a business recently at around 25 million in total value, and the multiple on that was well over 6 times the earnings of the business. So as you scale up in size, we see upward pressure on the multiples that you get. But generally speaking, a very common multiple that we've used for years now, and it still holds true, is 3. And it's just because when you take a look and start shaking out the numbers all the time, it usually always shakes out around the same. And that doesn't mean that it's that simplistic. It's a really complex process to get this one basic number. But take your annual profits, times them by 3, and you're going to have a very rough ballpark, a very rough area as to what your business is probably worth. Where you can amplify that would, again, can you be at the broader part of the range? Do you get a 4-time multiple? Do you have a 2.5-time multiple? These make big differences depending on the size of the business. A business that makes $50,000 a year bottom line, a 3 multiple is 150,000. A 4 multiple is 200,000. That's a big difference at the end of the day when you're putting an additional 50K in your back pocket. So those elements, those 4 pillars are pretty important.
Yeah. Yeah. And 3 was the number I had in my head as well. So that's sort of been like, I knew that number. We could have had just cut the podcast short and said it's worth 3 times, but like I know there's more to it. And what are the more important things like there? Is it growth? Like let's use the 50K profits number, right? If it's 50K year after year, okay, that's safe. But if it had been growing steadily, is that like that's going to be worth maybe a little bit more than 3? Or what's the more important thing? And of the many things we talked about.
Well, so, I mean, I want to think about it more like building up like a Jenga tower, right? All these things kind of work together. If you start doing well in all of these categories, growth will certainly accelerate that multiple, and it certainly pushes the multiple really, really high. As does like a low risk profile, a really good brand, right? A really good brand just means that it's not subject to the same level of risk that you would find elsewhere. But, and here's the big but, is that if you have one element that you're really bad with, it can pull the rug out from the entire tower and cause it all to collapse. You can have a quickly growing business, but if it's not defensible at all, or you're employing your entire family, I can't sell that. You can have a really great business. I came across this business years ago that was doing custom grant writing proposals for people. The guy was, netting about $250,000 a year, but I couldn't show it because his books were such a mess. We couldn't show it. And I told him, I said, we need to go back. We need to clean this up. He's like, I don't know if I can. I said, okay, your next best option then is start today, and let's hope that things continue well for the next 2 or 3 years, and then maybe you can sell. The fact is, in that situation, buyers aren't going to be like, well, I trust you enough to write you a check for this. No, they want to see the proof, right? They want to see the bank statements and validate that what you're saying is true. Even if they like you, they aren't going to, $500,000 like you, right? So, yeah. So what's the most important thing? Look, growth, if I would say one thing, growth, but just with the understanding that if you don't get the other elements right, it can pull out any other valuation that you get.
It's a great point. It's a lot like the human body, right? There's all kinds of things you can do well, but if you doing some bad things, it can just not work out good for you. So one of the things I was going to ask is, other than your pillars, and say other than the brand, I was trying to think of other ways that you could increase the multiple. And you said there was hundreds of little, levers that could affect it. I would assume these days, from just things I've thought about and watching what people are doing, reoccurring seems to be big, whether it's a SaaS company or meal delivery or whatever the thing is. If you can get something on reoccurring, is this true?
Yeah, recurring can garner much higher multiples, and you get into an interesting area with recurring, like with SaaS companies. The valuations start to get kind of crazy. You can have a SaaS company that is not profitable, but sells for a multiple of earnings, and multiple of revenue as opposed to earnings, and those multiples can be mind-blowingly big. The trick with recurring revenue that you need to see is, does your recurring revenue or the lifetime value of the client or the churn, so we're throwing a lot of terms in here, but do these things outweigh your cost of acquisition, right? So when we start to look at how much is this client really going to be worth, and how much time is it going to be able to take for us to get there, to that total lifetime value, and then we take a look at how much does it cost to acquire this client, what does that financial picture look like? I'll give you a very real example. Another business I own is a dating website. When I came in, the lifetime value of our clients that were canceling was like $140, $150. But when you looked at how did that actually work out, that was being skewed pretty heavily by some guys that were on there for like 15 years, right? And so from a business owner standpoint, I don't want to wait 15 years to get that average value up there. So really my business standpoint there was, okay, well, what is my 3-month value? What is my 6-month value for each client? And now I was getting a number that was closer to $40, $50 in that range. And then I can back that in to say, what is my cost of acquisition? From a buying standpoint, and my cost of acquisition is $30, and my lifetime value over a 6-month period is $50. That's a winning formula for me to be able to scale up. But I do know that I'm going to have cash flow issues because I have to wait 6 months, right, to get that money back in the door. So cash flow will be an issue. That's a complex answer to a simple question, but the simple answer to the question is, are recurring businesses more valuable, and will that push value up? Absolutely. But you have to show the metrics are there, which would be the lifetime value and cost of acquisition have to make sense within the right amount of time frame. There. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I think I got that right.
Yeah, no, that's good. I get it. I hope everyone else listening got it. It's some of those things are a little more complicated.
It's a Friday afternoon, guys. I'm hoping I got this right here.
Yeah,
Well,
we got it.
It's where are you located again?
I'm up in Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Oh
Oh,
gosh.
yeah.
And so do I have, and I'm going to use this. So Jesse's from Minnesota too.
I saw the Minnesota Twins baseball behind him. I was
Yeah.
actually I was going to mention that.
But I'm going to use an analogy of someone that neither of you like, but Mark, you're showing me the importance of this. Lombardi, sorry guys. So Lombardi holds a football up at the beginning of every practice and says, "Gentlemen, this is a football." Mark, what you're really doing is you're reminding us just how important the basics are. That's what you're really reminding us. Like, yeah, you got to still do this other stuff and do the brand and, create content, do so many important things. But at the end of the day, if you want to stop doing that and transfer your business to somebody else, it's in the minutia of those small day-to-day things that's really going to make or break this happening. That's what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I forgive you for using Lombardi. He's a transformational figure, so it's okay. Definitely okay. No, you're right though, and I love taking this concept at a high level though, because we talk about acquisitions, and I think people think they go back to Wall Street, the movie Wall Street. They go back to Boiler Room or these movies where people are talking this really kind of heavy negotiation and really complex sort of valuations. And if you do research on valuations, boy, it can get really complex. But what I love to do, I love to take these concepts and try and see them for what they really are. Well, what is a valuation? It's just a prediction. That's all it is. It's a prediction of what somebody's going to be willing to pay for your business. And then we can boil it down to even the more simple aspect than that. Why would somebody want to buy your business? Well, they hope to make money on it. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Look, that doesn't mean that's all there is to it. There's other things, of course, that do come into play. But if you don't have the fundamentals right, you're not going to get the advanced concepts right either. So it starts with that. And I don't care if you're starting out or if you've been in business for 10 years, 15 years. I have these conversations with people who have been in business for 15 years and have big businesses. We're talking about the same things with them. Let's get these things right. Let's get these things cleaned up. Let's get these financials cleaned up. We have a client now that, we might be going to market soon at $8 or $9 million, maybe $10 million for their business. We've had it on hold because we need to get some things cleaned up that they didn't get cleaned up from the beginning. It's fine. We'll get there. We're building the airplane along the way, right? And that's okay. But we can't get to the next step without having these fundamentals in place.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff there. I know I did want to shift a little bit into like, there's like extra forces in the market here where like there's a bunch of institutional money, a bunch of people rolling up e-com businesses, FBA businesses. Are you seeing that affecting valuation? Because you mentioned, I'll back up. You mentioned that at the higher level, the valuation seems to be quite a bit higher. Is that because of the effect of these types of roll-ups or, I don't know what you would call them, roll-ups or institutional money coming in?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And you're right. Institutional money has been flooding into the space recently. We are seeing multiples increase. To give you an idea of that, if I take a look at the transactions we closed at the beginning of last year, the average multiple was like 3.2, the median multiple. If you take a look at just our last quarter in 2020, the median multiple was 3.75, right? And so now that's partially based on the types of deals that we were closing back then, but there has been upward pressure on multiples from this institutional money. As far as why are these larger deals getting more higher multiples? No, it's not that actually. It's that counterintuitively, bigger acquisitions are less risky than smaller acquisitions. They just have more. A company that's doing $20-30 million in revenue, there's no question as to whether or not it has product market fit. We know it, right? There's 20 to 30 million reasons to say that there's product market fit. And so companies are more willing to spend on that sort of company and spend a higher multiple than a company where, you have an owner, they're pulling in $50,000 a year. And look, if this business takes a turn for the worse, you have no margin left. They're pretty risky acquisitions at the smaller end. You're just risking less money.
Okay. No, very interesting, because I have in the past looked at businesses that I could handle, and which was like under 50K total. And it seemed like there was some pretty big steep valuations. It's probably because there was just people like me looking at it. And I know you're looking at a different scale where the millions of dollars, like there's accountants looking at it. There's actually they're doing real due diligence. So
well, yeah, when you get to really smaller transactions, you do sometimes get into the game of unrealized potential. And so, a long time ago, I had some forums that I owned for home brewing beer, right? And I was making a little bit of money on it, but not much. I made the conscious decision with that business that I was going to pull off all ads and just run it for free for about a year, because I knew I wasn't going to do what needed to be done to really monetize it. And I wanted buyers, when I got to that point, to just use their imaginations as to what they could do with it, right? Yeah. And so that was a situation where I was just saying, hey, look, guys, I forget how many members I had. I have like 500 people here that regularly talk about brewing beer, right? Pretty cool. You can sell products to them. You can do advertising. I don't know, figure it out on your own. And I ended up selling that for a decent amount of money. So smaller valuations don't follow the same rules all the time.
Yeah. Okay. No, really interesting. I think, as we mentioned previously, Rich and I could probably talk to you all day long, because I'm very interested in the game of buying and selling websites. And hopefully people listening are also thinking about, oh yeah, I didn't realize I could sell this site. So hopefully everybody's getting some extra knowledge here. RichE, what have we not asked that we should ask?
Well, going with your point of I could talk for hours, but I don't want to torture everyone on that. Definitely not Mark either. I would say, just how would we keep in touch with you if someone wanted to learn more about what you're up to, or learn more about how they could work with you, or in whatever capacity? What do you think is the best way for someone to follow up with you?
Yeah, so I'll give a couple of places. One, I also host a podcast. It's called the Quiet Light Podcast. I host it with my business partner, Joe Valley. And we talk about this stuff all the time, right? We talk to previous sellers, previous buyers, and other companies that are there to try and help build the value of these businesses. So the Quiet Light Podcast. The other place I would look at would be, I have a basic course that I put together, which teaches these 4 pillars. It goes into more detail as well as to how these valuations work. You can find that at courses.quietlightbrokerage.com. It's free. I don't charge anything for it. It's there really just to teach this, because I want people to understand that first concept that we talked about, which is when you're building a business, it's not just about the income it's going to produce. It's about the asset value as well. That is something where if you do build your business properly, one of the biggest events in your life, liquidity events in your life, can be selling that business. And that doesn't mean you have to. That doesn't mean that this should be the main goal. Owning a business is great. If you are able to build something that is kicking off cash, hang on to that until it doesn't make sense to hang on to it anymore. And when it doesn't make sense to hang on to it anymore, make sure you're getting as much value as you can. And that's what I really want to get across. So courses.quietlightbrokerage.com. Lastly, if you just want to talk, email me, mark@quietlight.com. Happy to talk.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, cool. I'll be in the show notes for everybody on the page. So, wow. Awesome. Mark, I learned a bunch. Hope everybody else learned a bunch. For everybody out there listening, get out there and make it happen. Bye, everyone.
Hey, this is Jesse and Rich. We want to let you know we really appreciate you listening.
We hope you find the tips we give you helpful for growing your business.
You can find all of our past episodes and a lot more useful stuff at ecwid.com/podcast.
And also, check us out on your favorite podcasting platform like Apple Podcast or Stitcher. And make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing.
Be sure to let us know what you think by rating and reviewing so we can serve you better.
So subscribe on your favorite platform.
And come join our community, check out the transcripts, or tell us why you would be a great guest at ecwid.com/podcast.